Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Imagine finding out that your entire life was built on a lie so dark that it involved pretending someone close to you is dead. That's what happened to me when I discovered that my sister, who I thought had died years ago, was actually alive and living just a few towns over. The truth shook me to my core, and the story of how it all came to light is even more insane than you'd think. Growing up, my family had a lot of unspoken rules, but one of the biggest was this. We didn't talk about my older sister, Hannah. She had died when I was 5 years old, and while I remembered her vaguely, a warm laugh, the way her hair smelled like vanilla, I didn't really know her. My parents always said it was a tragic accident, but the details were blurry, like a story they told half-heartedly and didn't want me to question. As I grew older, I stopped asking. It was just one of those painful things we were supposed to leave in the past. But last month, everything changed. I was at my grandmother's house helping her sort through some old boxes when it happened. We were going through stacks of papers and keepsakes, reminiscing about random memories from my childhood. That's when I heard her say it, Hannah's name. "Oh, Hannah always loved this necklace," my grandmother said, holding up a small silver pendant. She said it so casually, like Hannah had just been there yesterday. At first, I froze. "Loved?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. She didn't meet my eyes. "Yes, yes. Of course, loved," she said quickly, but her tone had changed. She fumbled with the necklace and stuffed it back into the box like she'd suddenly realized she wasn't supposed to say that. "Grandma, what do you mean?" I pressed. My heart was pounding. "Why are you talking about her like she's alive?" Her face went pale, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. "It's nothing, sweetheart," she said, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't worry about things like this." Then she stood up and left the room, muttering something about making tea. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the way my grandmother had looked, like she'd accidentally let out a secret. Why would she talk about Hannah in the present tense? And why did she look so panicked when I asked? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about Hannah. My parents never told me much beyond the vague story of a car accident. No details, no dates, no answers to my childhood questions. It was as if they wanted to erase her entirely. The next day, I went home and started digging. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew I was looking for something. Anything. I pulled out the dusty family photo albums that had been sitting on a shelf for years. As I flipped through them, I realized something strange. There were barely any pictures of Hannah. The few photos I did find were odd. Some had been cropped so tightly that her face was barely visible, like someone had deliberately tried to cut her out. In one picture, she was holding me as a baby, but her face was blurry, almost like it had been intentionally smudged. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Then, tucked into the back of one of the albums, I found something that didn't fit. An old school directory from the year before Hannah's death. Her name was listed in the directory, along with an address. But here's the thing. It didn't make sense. The directory was dated 2 years after she supposedly died. I sat there staring at the page, my hands trembling. If the date was correct, then Hannah had been alive well after the accident. But how was that possible? Had my parents lied to me? And if they had, why? The discovery felt like a thread unraveling a tapestry. I couldn't stop pulling at it, even though I was terrified of what I might find. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone as if it were just another ordinary day. My mom walked in, looking frazzled as usual, juggling a to-do list that seemed never-ending. I decided to ease into the conversation, hoping to keep things casual enough not to raise any alarms. "Hey, Mom," I said, holding up the old-school directory I'd found the night before. "I came across this while organizing some stuff. Look, Hannah's name isn't here. Isn't that kind of weird? I mean, wasn't this printed after the accident?" She froze. For a split second, her expression was unreadable, like her brain was racing to figure out how to respond. Then, just as quickly, she plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, that's probably just a mistake," she said, laughing nervously. "You know how those things are. Typos happen all the time in old records." Her voice was light, but her hands gave her away. She was gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. "Yeah, maybe," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's just kind of strange, right? I mean, why would they get the year wrong?" She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Honey, I wouldn't overthink it. It's just a silly old directory. I nodded. But the way she practically bolted out of the room told me everything I needed to know. She was lying. Later that afternoon, I decided to call my grandmother. I figured she'd been the one to let something slip in the first place, so maybe she'd give me more if I pushed her a little. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Hi, Grandma," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about Hannah." Her voice immediately turned cautious. "What about it, sweetheart?" "Well, you mentioned her like she was still alive," I said. "And I found something odd. An old directory with her name in it from years after the accident. It doesn't make sense." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, as if she was debating whether to say anything at all. "Grandma," I pressed, "please, just tell me the truth. What's going on?" She sighed heavily. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't want to dig into this. Trust me, it's better left alone." "Why?" I demanded. "Why can't anyone give me a straight answer about my own sister? If she's really dead, then why do things keep pointing to the opposite?" Another pause. Then, almost under her breath, she muttered, "Your parents did what they had to do." My heart skipped a beat. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice rising. "What did they do?" She immediately backtracked. "Nothing, nothing," she said quickly. "Forget I said that. It's not my place to talk about this. Grandma, please." But she cut me off. "I have to go now, dear. Take care of yourself, okay?" And with that, she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, her words replaying in my mind. Did what they had to do. It sounded ominous, like some dark secret they'd buried and hoped I'd never uncover. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to get to the bottom of it. That night, I dove headfirst into an internet rabbit hole. I didn't expect to find anything. It had been almost 20 years since Hannah's supposed death, and people don't just disappear without a trace. Still, I had to try. I started with the basics, searching for her full name, the date of her death, and anything that might jog a memory. But nothing came up. It was like she had never existed. I felt a sinking pit in my stomach. Had my parents really managed to erase her from everything? But just as I was about to give up, I stumbled across something. It was an old newspaper archive from a small town paper in a neighboring county. The headline wasn't about Hannah, but her name appeared in the article. It was a brief mention, buried in a story about a local high school event. My heart raced as I read the date. It was 2 years after her supposed death. The article described Hannah as a volunteer at the event, helping with decorations. There was no picture, but the name and description matched perfectly. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. If this article was accurate, then Hannah hadn't died in an accident. She was alive. At least she had been 2 years after we buried her. Something wasn't adding up, and I was determined to figure out what it was. After my grandmother's cryptic slip and the unsettling newspaper discovery, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something big, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. But I couldn't do it alone. That's when I called my best friend, Emily. Emily was a self-proclaimed internet sleuth and conspiracy theorist, the kind of person who could find anyone online with just a first name and a vague description. When I told her what I'd found and what I suspected, she didn't even hesitate. "Send me everything you have," she said. "I'll get to work tonight." We spent hours diving into every digital corner we could think of. Old social media accounts, local forums, archived newspaper clippings. At first, it felt like we were hitting dead end after dead end. Hannah's name never appeared where it should have. No social media accounts, no legal records, nothing. It was like she'd been wiped clean from the world. But then Emily hit gold. "Wait," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement over the phone. "I think I've got something. Check this out." She sent me a link to a community Facebook page for a small town about an hour away. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. It was a photo from a recent charity event. A group of women standing in front of a food truck, all smiling for the camera. And there she was. She was older than I remembered, of course. Her face more mature, her hair shorter and darker. But there was no mistaking it. It was Hannah. Or, at least, someone who looked exactly like her. "Her name is Anna," Emily said, reading off the event caption. "At least, that's what she goes by now. And get this, she's pretty active in the community. I found her name mentioned in a bunch of posts, and it looks like she's involved with local volunteer work." I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking as I stared at the picture, zooming in on her face over and over again. Was this really her? Was my sister, my supposedly dead sister, alive and living just a few towns away under a new name? I barely slept that night. The next morning, I decided I needed more than just a picture to go on. I called the organizer of the charity event, pretending to be a journalist doing a feature on the town's volunteer work. It was surprisingly easy to get the information I needed. "Oh, Anna's wonderful," the organizer gushed over the phone. "She's been volunteering with us for years now. Such a sweet woman. I think she runs a small business too, but I'm not sure." I try to keep my voice steady. "Do you happen to know her last name? I'd love to follow up with her for an interview." "Sure," the woman said cheerfully. "It's Anna Grace. Let me know if you need her contact info." Anna Grace. It wasn't the last name I expected, but it didn't matter. When I searched the name online, my stomach dropped. Her birth date was listed on an old business license, and it matched Hannah's exactly. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called Emily, barely able to get the words out as I told her what I'd found. "This is insane," she said. "What are you going to do? Are you going to contact her?" I didn't know. My emotions were all over the place. Anger at my parents for lying to me, confusion about why Hannah would stay hidden, and an overwhelming need to see her in person, to know for sure that it was really her. But one thing was clear. I wasn't stopping now. This wasn't just about answers anymore. This was about my sister, about finally uncovering the truth they tried so hard to bury. By the time I walked into my parents' house that evening, my heart was pounding like a drum. I clutched my phone in my hand, the picture of Anna still open on the screen. My entire body felt tense, but I knew there was no turning back now. This time, I was getting answers, no matter what it took. "Mom, Dad, can we talk?" I asked, keeping my voice steady as I stepped into the living room. They were sitting together, my dad reading a newspaper and my mom scrolling on her tablet. They both looked up at me, and I saw a flicker of apprehension cross my mom's face. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her tone too bright, too forced. "What's on your mind?" I didn't waste time easing into it. I held up my phone and showed them the picture. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice sharp. My dad squinted at the screen, then shrugged dismissively. "I don't know." "Why?" "It's Hannah," I said, my words cutting through the air like a blade. "Or, at least, it looks a hell of a lot like her. And before you try to deny it, I already know her name is Anna Grace, and her birth date matches Hannah's exactly." The room went deathly silent. My dad's face darkened, his jaw tightening, while my mom's hand flew to her mouth. She looked like she might burst into tears. "Where did you get this?" my dad demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I snapped. "What matters is that I know you've been lying to me. Hannah isn't dead, is she?" My mom let out a soft sob, but my dad stayed stone-faced. "You don't understand," he said, his tone clipped. "Then explain it to me," I shouted. "Because right now, all I know is that my sister has been alive this whole time, and you made me believe she was gone. Why would you do that?" My mom broke first. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "We didn't have a choice." "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. She looked at my dad, as if pleading for him to take over, but he just crossed his arms and stared at the floor, his expression unreadable. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to explain. "Hannah made some bad choices," my mom said, her voice trembling. "When she was a teenager, she started hanging out with the wrong crowd, drinking, sneaking out, getting into trouble. But it wasn't just that. There was a boy." "A boy," I repeated, my mind racing to connect the dots. "He was older," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Much older. And when things got complicated, we couldn't let it ruin everything. Your father's career, our reputation. It was all at stake." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "So, what? You just sent her away and told everyone she was dead?" My dad finally spoke, his voice cold and firm. "It wasn't that simple. She was out of control, and we couldn't help her. We did what we had to do to protect our family." "Protect the family?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You mean protect yourselves? You lied to me, your own child, just to avoid a scandal?" My mom broke into sobs, her hands covering her face, while my dad remained stoic. "You were so young," he said. "You wouldn't have understood. And honestly, it was easier this way. She agreed to it, you know? She agreed to leave and start over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Easier for who?" I shouted. "Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for her. Do you have any idea what you did to her? To me?" I stormed out of the house, my mind reeling. The truth was so much worse than I had imagined. They hadn't just lied, they had erased her, like she was some kind of stain on their perfect image. Sitting in my car, I stared at the picture of Hannah, on my phone. I couldn't stop thinking about what my parents had said. They acted like they had no choice, but that wasn't true. They made a choice, and it was a cruel one. All I could think about was how much pain Hannah must have gone through, being cast out by her own family, how lonely and betrayed she must have felt. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let my parents' lies control me anymore. It was time to find Hannah. It was time to bring her back. The drive to the small town where Anna lived felt like an eternity. I had barely slept the night before, replaying my parents' words in my head, trying to make sense of how they could have done something so unforgivable. Now, I was finally going to see my sister, my supposedly dead sister, face to face. As I approached the address, my heart pounded in my chest. The house was unassuming, a modest one-story home with a neat garden out front. A few wind chimes hung from the porch, tinkling softly in the breeze. It was the kind of place where someone might go to escape, to start over. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the courage to knock on the door. Finally, I got out, walked up the path, and rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, and I held my breath. When the door opened, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter and darker, and there were faint lines on her face that hadn't been there before. But her eyes, they were unmistakable. Those same warm, hazel eyes I remembered from my childhood stared back at me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Hannah," I finally managed, my voice shaky. "It's me, your sister." Her face didn't light up with joy or recognition the way I'd imagined. Instead, her expression darkened. She glanced quickly over her shoulder, then back at me, her body tensed as if ready to slam the door shut. "You shouldn't be here," she said in a hushed voice, her eyes darting around as though someone might be watching. I blinked, taken aback. "What?" "Hannah, it's me. I had to see you. I found out the truth and—" She grabbed my arm and yanked me inside, shutting the door behind me with a loud click. Then she locked it. Twice. The inside of the house was cozy but sparse. There were no family photos on the walls, no signs of her life before she became Anna. A stack of books sat on a small coffee table, and the faint smell of lavender lingered in the air. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, keeping her voice low. "I had to find you," I said, still trying to process her reaction. "I just found out you were alive. Mom and Dad, they lied to me. They told me you were dead. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Her face softened for a moment, and I thought I saw tears welling up in her eyes. But then she shook her head, her jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," she said, her tone firm. "It's not safe." "Not safe?" I repeated, frowning. "What are you talking about? Who's not safe?" She turned away, pacing the small living room. "You don't understand," she said. "I've spent years trying to stay off their radar, and now you've just shown up at my door. If they find out—" "Wait, who?" I interrupted. "If who finds out? Mom and Dad? Hannah, they already know I found you." She stopped pacing and stared at me, her face pale. "They know?" "Yes," I said, confused. "I confronted them about it. They admitted everything. They said you made some bad choices as a teenager and that they couldn't let it ruin the family's reputation. But that doesn't justify what they did to you. They had no right." "They had every right," she snapped, cutting me off. "You don't know the whole story." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Then tell me," I said, my voice breaking. "Please, Hannah. I've spent my entire life thinking you were dead. I deserve to know the truth." She sighed heavily, sitting down on the edge of the couch. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she began to speak. "I was 17, she said, staring at the floor. "And yeah, I made some mistakes. I got involved with someone I shouldn't have, someone older. At first, it was just a stupid crush, but then things got serious. Too serious." I sat down across from her, hanging on every word. "When Mom and Dad found out, they were furious," she continued. "They told me he was dangerous, but I didn't listen. I thought they were just being controlling, like always. Then things got complicated." "Complicated how?" I asked. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "I got pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And when I told him, he freaked out. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and that I needed to take care of it." My stomach churned. "What did you do?" "I didn't know what to do," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared and alone, and I thought he loved me. When I refused, he threatened me. That's when Mom and Dad stepped in. They said they'd handle it, but I had to agree to their terms. No contact with anyone from my old life. No coming back." "Wait," I said, my mind racing. So, they sent you away because of this guy? Why not just support you? Why pretend you were dead? Because he wasn't just some guy, she said bitterly. He was someone important, someone with connections. If word got out about the baby, it could have ruined everything. For him, for mom and dad, for all of us. I felt like I was going to be sick. My parents had erased my sister's existence to protect some man's reputation. Where's the baby now? I asked hesitantly. She shook her head. There was no baby. I miscarried a few months later, but by then, it didn't matter. I'd already been cut off, and they weren't going to let me come back. I had to start over. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of her story pressing down on both of us. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it better, but there were no words. I'm sorry, I finally said. I'm so sorry for what they did to you. You didn't deserve that. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. I don't blame you, she said. You were just a kid, but you need to leave. Please, for your own sake. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. You're my sister, and I'm not losing you again. She shook her head, but this time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone, and neither was I. Hannah, or Anna, as she was now known, sat across from me, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes darted around the room like she expected someone to burst through the door at any moment. I could see the years of fear and stress etched into her face, and it broke my heart. You need to understand, she began, her voice low but steady. I didn't just leave. They made me leave. They didn't give me a choice. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a surge of anger rise within me. I know, I said. They told me about the choices you made, the guy you were involved with, and the pregnancy. But that doesn't explain why they cut you off completely, why they told me you were dead. It doesn't make any sense. Hannah shook her head, her lips curling into a bitter smile. Of course it doesn't make sense, she said, because it wasn't about me, it was about them. It was always about them. She took a deep breath, setting the mug down on the table. After everything happened with him, the guy I was seeing, Mom and Dad decided I was too much of a liability. They said I'd embarrassed the family and that they couldn't let me drag you or their reputation down with me. So, they gave me an ultimatum. Disappear or deal with the consequences. Consequences? I asked, my stomach tightening. They said they'd make sure I never got a job, never had a future. They'd use their connections to ruin my life if I didn't play along. And I was 17. I didn't know what else to do. So I left. I stared at her, my chest tightening as I processed her words. But you were just a teenager. How could they do that to you? You were their daughter. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and I saw a flicker of something raw and painful there. Because I wasn't their priority anymore, she said quietly. You were. What? They didn't want me corrupting you, she explained. They thought I'd be a bad influence, that I'd ruin your chances of having a normal life. So, they erased me. As far as they were concerned, I didn't exist anymore. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The idea that my parents had chosen to protect their image over their own child was sickening. But you tried to reach out, didn't you? I asked. Grandma, she knew. She slipped up and mentioned you. That's why I started digging in the first place. Hannah's expression softened slightly, and she nodded. Yeah, I stayed in touch with Grandma. Secretly, of course. She was the only one who didn't turn her back on me. She sent me money when I needed it, helped me get on my feet. But she also warned me never to contact you. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would she do that? Because Mom and Dad made it clear what would happen if I did, she said. They told me if I ever reached out to you or anyone else in the family, they'd ruin me all over again. And I believed them. They had the power to do it. Hearing this made my blood boil. So, you've been living like this, alone, scared, hiding, for all these years? Because of them? She nodded, her hands tightening into fists. I've tried to move on, to build a life for myself, but it's always been there, hanging over my head. The fear that they'd find a way to punish me if I ever stepped out of line. I couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached across the table and grabbed her hands. I'm so sorry, I said. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. It's not your fault, she said, her voice softening. You were just a kid. They kept you in the dark, and honestly, I'm glad they did. You didn't deserve to get dragged into their mess. But you didn't deserve this, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't deserve to be erased from your own family. For a moment, We sat there in silence, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on us. Then, a new question bubbled to the surface of my mind, one that had been nagging at me since the moment I walked into her house. "Why were you so scared when you saw me?" I asked. "You looked like you thought someone was coming after you." Hannah hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the window. "Because I didn't know if you were here on your own, or if they sent you." "What?" "Mom and Dad," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't know if you'd come because you found out the truth, or because they told you to. They've kept tabs on me over the years, made sure I stayed in line. I thought maybe this was their way of reminding me to stay quiet." The thought of my parents manipulating me like that made my stomach churn. "No," I said firmly. "I'm here because I wanted to find you. Because I needed to find you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just hard to trust anyone after everything." "I get it," I said. "But I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm here, and I'm not letting them control us anymore." She gave me a small, tentative smile, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since I arrived. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." As the night wore on, we talked for hours, unraveling the tangled web of lies and betrayal that had kept us apart for so long. Hannah told me about her life after she left, how she changed her name, worked odd jobs to get by, and eventually found a sense of stability in this small town. But no matter how much she tried to move on, the scars of what our parents had done to her never fully healed. She admitted that she still had nightmares sometimes, waking up in a cold sweat, convinced that they were coming for her. Hearing this only solidified my resolve. I couldn't let my parents get away with this. They had stolen years from us, years we could have spent together as sisters. "I'm going to fix this," I said, my voice filled with determination. Hannah looked at me, her eyes wary but hopeful. "How?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'll figure it out. They don't get to control us anymore." For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, and in that moment, I knew we were finally on the path to reclaiming the lives they had stolen from us. Driving back from Hannah's house, my mind raced with everything she had told me. The lies, the threats, the years of isolation she had endured, all orchestrated by our parents to protect their reputation. But as much as I wanted to focus on reconnecting with her, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. My parents' actions felt too calculated, too extreme. What else were they hiding? I decided to confront the only other person who might know the truth, my grandmother. The next morning, I drove to her house, still trying to figure out the best way to approach her. She greeted me at the door with her usual warm smile, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She must have known why I was there. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, ushering me inside. "What brings you here so early?" I followed her into the kitchen, where the familiar smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon lingered in the air. I sat down at the table, fidgeting with my hands as she poured us both a cup. "Grandma," I started, my voice steady but firm, "I need to talk to you about Hannah." Her hand froze mid-pour, and for a moment, I thought she might drop the pot. She set it down carefully and sat across from me, her expression guarded. "What about her?" "I found her," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened, and she let out a soft gasp. You've seen her?" "Yes," I said, and she told me everything. About how Mom and Dad sent her away, about the threats, about how you've been helping her all these years." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting a napkin into a tight knot. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly, "but I guess you deserve to know the truth." For the next hour, she told me her side of the story. She had always been close to Hannah and had tried to intervene when my parents decided to send her away. But they wouldn't listen. They were so obsessed with keeping up appearances, she said, her voice trembling. They didn't care what it did to her, or to you. After Hannah left, my grandmother had done everything she could to support her from a distance. She sent money, wrote letters, and even visited a few times in secret. But she had to be careful. My parents had made it clear that if she got too involved, they would cut her off, just like they did with Hannah. They didn't just threaten Hannah, she said, tears streaming down her face. They threatened me too. They said they'd stop letting me see you and your cousins, that they'd take away everything I had. And I believed them. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not angry with you," I said. "I'm angry with them. For putting you in that position, for making you choose." She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have done more to protect you both." After leaving my grandmother's house, I felt a mixture of sadness and rage. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that my parents' lies weren't just about Hannah. They had manipulated and controlled everyone around them to maintain their perfect image. I started digging deeper, determined to find out what else they were hiding. I went through old family photo albums, newspaper clippings, and even my father's business records. It wasn't long before I stumbled across something strange. In one of my dad's old files, I found a set of legal documents related to a company I had never heard of. It was a small business that had apparently been dissolved years ago, but what caught my attention was the name listed as a co-owner, the same man Hannah had been involved with as a teenager. My heart raced as I pieced it together. This wasn't just about a bad relationship or a teenage mistake. My dad had business ties to this man, ties he must have been desperate to protect. I spent hours researching the man, and what I found made my blood run cold. He wasn't just some random guy. He was a powerful figure in the local community, with connections to politics and law enforcement. There were even rumors of corruption and illegal dealings, though nothing had ever been proven. It suddenly made sense why my parents had gone to such extremes to bury the truth. If word had gotten out about Hannah's relationship with him and the pregnancy, it could have destroyed everything. Not just their reputation, but their finances, their social standing, their entire carefully constructed lives. But it didn't excuse what they had done. They had sacrificed my sister, erased her from our family, to protect their own interests. And now, knowing what I knew, I couldn't stay silent. That night, I called Hannah and told her everything I had discovered. She was quiet for a long time, and I could hear the tension in her voice when she finally spoke. "I always suspected there was more to it," she said, "but I never had proof. I didn't know about the business ties or how deep it went. Are you okay?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to let it go, to move on. But another part of me, I don't know if I can forgive them for what they did to us." "Neither can I said. "But we can't let them control us anymore. We need to confront them, together." Hannah hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of resolve I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about taking back the power my parents had stolen from us. It was time to face them and make them answer for everything they had done. The deeper I dug, the uglier the truth became. Hannah's bad choices weren't the reckless mistakes of a rebellious teenager. They were the result of manipulation, power, and betrayal from someone who should have never been in her life. The man she had been involved with wasn't just some older boyfriend. He was a powerful figure with deep ties to our family's world. His name was Charles Whitman, a man I vaguely remembered from my childhood. He had been a friend of my father's, often attending our family gatherings, always impeccably dressed, with a charismatic smile that seemed to charm everyone in the room. At the time, I had no idea who he really was. Now, as I pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Charles had taken advantage of Hannah when she was barely 17. He was nearly twice her age, and their relationship had been kept secret until it wasn't. When Hannah got pregnant, everything fell apart. Charles panicked, fearing the scandal would ruin his public image and his political aspirations. My parents, equally terrified of what it could mean for our family's reputation, intervened. They made a deal with him. Hannah would disappear, and in return, Charles would ensure the situation never became public. I uncovered this through a series of legal documents and old correspondences I found in my dad's files. There were letters from Charles to my father, cryptic but unmistakably tied to Hannah's situation. Phrases like, "Your discretion is appreciated," and "We cannot let this spiral out of control," made it clear that they were conspiring to bury the truth. The most damning piece of evidence was a bank statement from around the time Hannah was sent away. It showed a large payment from one of Charles's accounts to a private facility in another state, a place that specialized in helping troubled youth. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. My parents had essentially sold my sister's freedom to protect their reputation. When I confronted my grandmother with this new information, she broke down. "I didn't know all the details," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But I knew enough to understand that Charles was dangerous, and your parents were desperate to keep things quiet. They thought they were doing what was best for the family." "Best for the family?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "They let a man like that walk away without any consequences, and they destroyed Hannah's life in the process. How is that best for anyone?" She looked at me with a sadness that seemed to weigh her down. "They were scared," she said. "They thought they were protecting you, your father's career, and everything they'd worked for. But I knew it was wrong. I told them it was wrong." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. "And Charles?" I asked. "Where is he now?" "He's still around," she said bitterly. He's built quite a name for himself. Politics, business. He's untouchable. That word, untouchable, lit a fire inside me. I didn't care how powerful Charles was. He had preyed on my sister, ruined her life, and walked away without so much as a slap on the wrist. And my parents had helped him do it. I spent the next few days researching Charles, finding everything I could about his life since Hannah. He had climbed the ranks in politics and was now a prominent figure in state government. His face was all over campaign ads, smiling with his picture-perfect family, presenting himself as a man of integrity and honor. The hypocrisy made me sick. As I read more, I found hints of other scandals that had been quietly swept under the rug. Anonymous accusations of misconduct, whispers of financial impropriety, nothing concrete, but enough to paint a picture of a man who thrived on manipulation and cover-ups. I realized that my parents hadn't just destroyed Hannah's life to protect themselves, they had protected a predator. When I shared what I'd found with Hannah, her reaction was a mix of anger and resignation. "I'm not surprised," she said. "He always had a way of getting what he wanted, no matter who he hurt in the process. But he doesn't get to win," I said. "Not anymore. People need to know the truth about him, and about what Mom and Dad did to protect him." Hannah hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said. "I've spent so many years trying to move on, trying to build a new life. Bringing all of this back up. It's terrifying." "I understand," I said gently, "but you don't have to do this alone. We can do it together. And if you're not ready, I'll still fight for you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "but I need time to think." That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the mountain of evidence I had gathered. The anger I felt toward my parents was almost unbearable. They had let their fear of scandal dictate their lives, and in doing so, they had destroyed everything that truly mattered. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not anymore. The next step was clear. I needed to confront them again. This time, I wasn't just armed with questions. I had the truth, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I didn't care about their excuses or their justifications. They had betrayed their own daughter, their own family, to protect a man who deserved to rot in prison. It was time for them to face the consequences of their choices. And as for Charles Whitman, his days of hiding behind his power and connections were numbered. I was going to make sure of it. The decision to confront our parents wasn't easy. Hannah and I spent hours going back and forth, weighing the risks and the potential fallout. I wanted to go in guns blazing, to demand answers and justice for what they had done. But Hannah, ever cautious after years of living in fear, was more hesitant. "I don't want to blow up my life again," she said quietly as we sat in her living room, the weight of the decision heavy between us. "I've worked so hard to put this behind me. But I also can't keep running from them. You don't have to do this alone," I told her. "Whatever happens, I'm with you. But they need to face what they did. They need to understand the damage they've caused." Hannah hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The drive to our parents' house felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. Hannah sat quietly beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see the tension in her posture, the way she kept glancing out the window as if she were bracing for impact. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Positive," I said. "It's time." I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding. It felt like an eternity before the door opened, and when it did, my mom's face went pale. She stared at us, her eyes darting between me and Hannah as if she were seeing ghosts. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice cold. She didn't respond. Instead, she stepped back, her hand trembling as she gestured for us to come inside. My dad appeared in the hallway, and the moment he saw Hannah, his expression hardened. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "We need to talk," I said, stepping into the living room. All of us. Once we were seated, I didn't waste any time. I laid everything out, the lies, the manipulation, the deal with Charles Whitman. I told them about the evidence I had found, the documents, the payments, the lengths they had gone to in order to cover up what happened. My mom sat silently, tears streaming down her face. My dad, on the other hand, tried to fight back. "You don't understand the position we were in," he said, his voice defensive. "We did what we had to do to protect this family." "Protect this family?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "You destroyed this family. You threw Hannah away like she didn't matter, and you lied to me for my entire life. How is that protecting anyone?" "She was out of control," he said, his tone rising. She was making decisions that could have ruined everything we worked for. We didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Hannah said, her voice quiet but firm. It was the first time she had spoken since we arrived, and the room fell silent. My dad turned to her, his expression unreadable. You don't understand what it was like, he said. You were just a child. I was your child. She shot back, her voice trembling. And you abandoned me. You didn't try to help me or protect me. You just got rid of me because it was easier than dealing with the truth. The room was thick with tension, and for a moment, no one said anything. Then my mom broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. We were trying to protect you, she said, her words muffled. We thought it was the only way. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice cold. The truth? Or your own guilt? She didn't answer. Hannah let out a shaky breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't want revenge, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in it. I don't want anything from you. All I've ever wanted is to live my life without fear, without feeling like I have to look over my shoulder because of what you might do. My dad leaned forward, his face buried in his hands. We never wanted to hurt you, he said, his voice barely audible. We thought we were doing the right thing, but we were wrong. God, we were so wrong. The confession felt hollow, but it was something. For the first time, my parents were facing the reality of what they had done. They didn't try to deny it anymore, didn't try to justify their actions. They just sat there, broken and ashamed. I can't forgive you, I said finally, my voice firm. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you don't get to control us anymore. You don't get to keep hiding behind your lies. Hannah nodded, her gaze steady. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said. I'm done letting you dictate my life. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in my parents' eyes. Regret, maybe even remorse. When we left, the house felt different, as if the carefully constructed facade they had built over the years had finally crumbled. Hannah and I didn't say much on the drive back, but as we pulled into her driveway, she turned to me and smiled. A small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. Thank you, she said. For what? I asked. For being my sister, she said. For believing me. For fighting for me. I reached over and squeezed her hand. We're in this together, I said. For the first time in years, it felt like we truly were. It's been 6 months since the truth unraveled, and in some ways, it feels like a lifetime ago. My world, once so neat and orderly, has been forever changed, and I'm still trying to find my footing amidst the wreckage. My parents, those towering figures I once trusted implicitly, are now strangers to me. The foundation of our family was built on lies, and while they've started trying to repair the damage, I'm not sure it can ever truly be fixed. Hannah and I, on the other hand, have become closer than I ever thought possible. In the months since that confrontation, we've spent hours talking, filling in the gaps of each other's lives. She told me about the years she spent alone, the struggles and triumphs of building a new life from nothing. And I told her about my childhood, about growing up believing she was gone and never understanding why there was an emptiness in our family. It hasn't been easy. The pain of what our parents did still lingers, and some wounds may never fully heal. But for the first time in decades, Hannah is free to live her life without fear or secrecy. Watching her reclaim her identity, her sense of self, has been nothing short of inspiring. One of the most meaningful moments came just a few weeks ago, my wedding. Hannah was there, sitting in the front row, beaming with pride as I walked down the aisle. For years, I had imagined my wedding day, but I never could have predicted how much it would mean to have her there. During the reception, she pulled me aside and handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, the same one our grandmother had shown me months earlier, the one Hannah used to wear as a teenager. I thought you should have this, she said, her voice soft. It's a piece of our past, but I want it to be part of your future too. I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. No, she said, pulling back and smiling. Thank you. For not giving up on me. As for my parents, things remain complicated. My mom has tried to reach out several times, apologizing and begging for a chance to make things right. My dad, on the other hand, has retreated into silence, his guilt weighing heavily on him. They've started therapy, something I never thought I'd see, and they've made an effort to acknowledge the pain they caused. But forgiveness doesn't come easy. I've set boundaries, and for now, I've kept them at arm's length. I visit occasionally, but the visits are brief and guarded. I don't think I'll ever trust them the way I once did, and that's okay. Not every relationship can be salvaged, and I've made peace with that. What matters most is that Hannah and I are rebuilding what was taken from us. We've spent weekends exploring the town where she lives, meeting her friends, and sharing stories about our childhoods. She's even started opening up about her dreams, things she'd long buried under the weight of fear and secrecy. I've been thinking about going back to school, she told me one afternoon as we walked through a local park. Maybe studying social work or counseling. I want to help people who've been through what I've been through. That's amazing, I said, my heart swelling with pride. You'd be incredible at that. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reminded me of the sister I used to know. This journey has taught me so much about resilience, love, and the power of truth. For years, I believed the lies my parents told, convinced that the world they created was the only one that mattered. But now, I see things differently. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living in a lie. It's not easy to face, and it doesn't come without consequences, but it's the only way to truly move forward. My family may never be the same, but in some ways, that's okay. We've shattered the illusion of perfection, and what's left is something raw and real. Hannah and I are building a new chapter together. A chapter that's ours, not defined by the mistakes or fears of others. And while the scars of the past will always be there, they no longer define us. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful. My sister is alive, and so is the bond we've rebuilt. That's more than enough for me.